Morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you all after break. I must say I have missed you terribly, and so I am so excited that first day back from break. I know you all are wide awake right now because you have not been sleeping in at all for the last 10 days. So it's good to see you all here and awake and ready to go. For those of you, yes, definitely worth clapping, Jake. Thank you. For those of you who I have not had a chance to talk to yet, my name is Mr. LaCasse. I hope by the end of the year, those of you who don't know me will come and hang out with me and tell me about your experience at Taft. It's really important for me to know all of you, particularly those who are newer to our community. This is going to come as a huge surprise to those of you who do know me. I'm going to talk about leadership today. Yes is the answer you want. Whoever said no over there. No. Madeline, that wasn't you who said no, was it? No? Max said it? Allie said it? Okay. Thank you, Miss Gilland. It's good to see you too. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. I promise I won't go on too long. I may cry, but that's always par for the course. If those of you who filled out the survey that I sent around in the fall, remember I asked you all what leadership was. I asked you to tell me what you thought the definition of leadership was. And so I'm going to quickly start by telling you what the compiled results of that were. So there were a lot of great answers to that question. It boiled down to about 5 bullet points. The first was leading by example. There's a strong tendency in the Taft community to feel that if I behave in the way that makes sense, other people will see that example and follow it. Always admirable and important. I'm going to suggest there's a little more nuance to this. So that's our starting point. Number 2, putting others before self. Nanotsubi seems like a natural component of what we do at Taft. And I will suggest if you are not thinking about those that you are trying to lead, you are not going to actually be leading anybody. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. The third one here is you've got to have some sort of vision or desire to influence the group in some way. Today, my goal is to have you all think about leadership. That's how I'm hoping to influence you. If I showed up here and I didn't really have a purpose, I wouldn't be leading anything. And then these two, I think, are probably the most salient ones that I pulled out of the group. Leadership is action. You can't lead anyone if you're not choosing to behave in a way that might cause something to change. And you also have to feel responsibility for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve or wherever this group is intended to go. If you don't feel those two things, or if you don't act and you don't feel responsible, it's going to be tough to convince anyone to follow you. So out of what I boiled all your many interesting answers down to, I think we have a good, strong sense of what leadership is in this community, and I'm going to use that as an introduction to our shared definition of leadership. How many of you have ever seen the Taft School definition of leadership? There are not a lot of hands. Thank you, Miss Leal. It's good to see you. Raise your hand. I appreciate that. So along those lines, let this be your introduction to the Taft definition of leadership. This predates me at Taft, but it is near and dear to my heart and reflects a lot of the research that I've done around leadership. It's made up of 4 key parts. I'm going to start with the last one, and then we're going to talk about the Mr. Wilson color-coded words that I have up there. So help one's group achieve its goals. That gets to that vision piece. This does not necessarily mean, though, that you are behaving in a particular way to help the group achieve its goals. So for instance, Allie giving me a hard time this morning, did she actually help our group achieve its goals? She provided levity in this moment. She got us all energized and excited. I really appreciated Allie's actions. Some could argue that that is meaningful leadership within the context of this room. Annie, did I call you Allie every single time? All right. Annie, by the way, this is particularly painful for Annie because she can't stand her sister. And so every time I call her Allie, she gets really upset with me. So it's your parents' fault because they named you both with A's. Oh, okay. That helps, Annie. Thank you. So I want to talk about the 3 values that are inherent in our definition of leadership. You cannot lead if you are not leading from a place of value, and moral fortitude. If you lead without some sort of moral fortitude, it's called narcissism, and it's evil, and the end result is going to be you're going to further your own interests, but you are not necessarily going to help a group get to a better place. The first one I want to talk about is empathy, and this is where I might cry. So just be forewarned. I'm hoping by telling you all this that it will keep me from crying, but every time I tell the story of Ruby Bridges, it causes me to be so... See, it's happening. I just have to say the girl's name. This young lady was a 6-year-old who was thrust into leadership not by her choice, but by her parents' choice, by society's choice, by educators' choices, and the end result of her action is profound. This young girl, 6 years old, desegregated the New Orleans school district. So if you think about this, it's 1960. Those of you in U.S. history know that the civil rights movement started and schools were desegregated as a result of the actions in Little Rock, and this is a big deal, changing the very nature and the way in which our community and our country functions. This young girl at 6 years old walked into an empty school. The white students who had attended that school refused to go to school. Not only was she going to school by herself, but when she went to school, she had to be escorted by federal marshals. So there's a famous Norman Rockwell painting called The Problem We All Live With. And this young girl is, you don't see the marshals, you see the marshals walking along and you just see their sort of motion like this, and they're in kind of lockstep. And this little 6-year-old girl has her books tucked under her arm and she's walking along. On the wall scrawled behind her is the N-word, there's a smashed tomato, and as you're looking at this girl, you're imagining the people who are lined along the way that these federal marshals have to be there to protect her from, screaming at this little girl. And so she's leading in a really profound way. At 6 years old, I'm not sure how aware she was of it, but her insight as a leader and the need for empathy is central to this story. So she's doing this leading, and of course, the adults in the world are trying to help protect her and help her navigate this moment in a way that she ultimately will be safe and not be damaged by the experience. And so they bring in the best minds around psychology and psychiatry to help support her. There's a doctor named Robert Coles who comes from Harvard who writes about children in crisis and managing these kinds of things. And this is where I always get choked up. Sorry. So he says to her, "What do you think about these people who are screaming at you as you go in?" And she says, "I pray for them." Think about that for a minute. This little girl who's doing this leading says, "I pray for these people who would do me harm were there not to be federal marshals around me taking me to school." Can you imagine that? And then so Robert Cole says, "Why would you pray for these people? These people, they're damaged, they're awful, they're terrible people." And she says, "Well, don't you think somebody should?" That is profound. That is empathy on the highest level. This 6-year-old demonstrates more leadership in that moment and more empathy than I think any of us, if we summoned all the empathy in this room, could imagine. So as you think about leadership, it's essential that you think first about those that you're trying to lead, even if there are people in that group who would cause you harm if they could pull it off. Does that make sense? Okay, first story. Made it through without crying, feeling pretty good about myself. The second one is actually courage. And I want to talk about courage in this community for a second. 2 papyruses ago, Preston Riley chose to write an article about our walk-back culture. I recognize that segregation and ending segregation and walk-back culture are not exactly the same thing, but I would suggest that Preston is demonstrating a fair amount of courage in even bringing that issue up. Because it is a broken system from my perspective, but I know if it's going to change, it's going to require all of you to do the work, and Preston is taking the lead in doing that. She is stepping into that void. She is opening herself up to risk and commentary by those of you in this room who would think that it's a bad idea to change walk-back culture, and she is getting us to think differently about the way in which our community functions. That's gutsy. And you cannot lead if you are not gutsy. And then our third value is integrity, which I saved for the end. I'm not really sure why I put them in this order, but I did. here's how integrity works. People are only going to follow you or be willing to work with you if they trust you. And the only way you're going to get people to trust you is if you demonstrate that you care about them and that you want to see them be successful. Now, one of the other things we know about leadership is you are going to disappoint the people who are following you. You have to build enough reservoir of trust that they are willing to be disappointed by you on various occasions. But if they know that you care about them, if they know that you're empathic to their experience, if they know that you are being bold and courageous, and they know that you care about them, they will follow you. So it's critical that you think about being a person of integrity, a person worthy of other people's trust if you are going to lead. This all seem reasonable? Okay. So, this is what W.H. Auden has to say about leadership. He says, a good leader understands that emotion precedes effective action. This is the other important thing about leadership. If people don't care, you're not going to be able to lead them. I am working really hard right now to get you all to care a lot about this. How am I doing? Show of hands. Anybody care about leadership right now?
You're killing it.
Killing it. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. And I like the second part of this line. A study of anthropology, for example, is not a good beginning for eradicating racial prejudice. You cannot get people to get excited about fixing the problems of injustice if all you do is talk about that injustice exists, you do some sort of academic study of it. You actually have to get them to care if you're going to get them to change their behavior, because you're trying to get them to stop doing what they're currently doing and do something new if you're actually leading. And so you must arouse a passion for treating one's neighbors as oneself. A passion for treating one's neighbors as oneself. I also like this Jim Collins quote. He talks about if you are going to lead, you have to provide or promote the idea of a service to a cause or purpose we are passionately dedicated to and willing to suffer or sacrifice. I am willing to sacrifice and suffer for all of you if it's going to make your lives better and make our community better. I will argue until the end of the day. I will get up in the middle of the night, whatever it is that's going to help our community be better. That's the thing that I'm willing to sacrifice and suffer for all of you. You need to do that if you are going to lead anybody. You have to figure out what it is that you are willing to sacrifice and suffer for, and then try and convince other people that they too are willing to sacrifice and suffer for that end. So to go back to Mr. Auden's quote about ending social injustice, if you are passionate about that, as I am, you have to help other people be passionate about it if we're actually going to change the nature of our community and its function. And then I got this from Mrs. Chandler. I think it's a great idea. This idea of a subordinate goal, a superordinate goal. And it's this idea that I'm going to put aside my personal elements in order to serve some greater cause than myself. That Taft is more important than me. We've got to find a goal that we all share that will have us put our self-interest as a secondary consideration to this idea of something that's important to all of us. Is that reasonable? Could equity and justice be something that we could all subjugate our own interest for that in our community? Yeah. Thank you. All right. So, what does this mean for you? For those you intend to lead, for our community? Here are 3 things I'm going to leave you with. First, leadership is really hard. If you are thinking you are leading and it is easy, you are doing something wrong. That sound fair? You got to take risks. You're going to make mistakes like I did with Annie. That's worth doing if you're going to help your group be better. But recognize that people are going to be upset with you. Recognize, like Preston's going to recognize as she helps lead our work around walkback culture, that it's going to be challenging. It is not easy to switch us from where we are, because I'm seeing some of you are quite comfortable at this moment, to where we could be. You've got to convince people that it's worth giving up the comfort of now for the better future in some way, shape, or form. Second, it's got to be better for other people. If your goal is to make things better for you, you have missed the whole point of leadership. Right, Daniel? Good. All right, and finally, and this is the most important thing, practice leading every single day in everything you do. If you think you only lead when you show up on this stage or when you're with your team or in that moment, that is where it's most critical to lead, but there are lots of moments you can practice leading. So as you walk out of Bingham Auditorium right now, you're going to be in a position to lead others. You could, for instance, say, let's go to the jig. Or you could say, let's go sit here and talk about this thing that's really important to me. Or you could do any number of things. Each of those opportunities, when you interact with another person, is an opportunity to practice leadership. Practice, practice, practice. That's the only way you're going to get to be a better leader. It means that you do it with intention and that you look for feedback. Do it with intention, look for feedback. Can we all do that? Are we excited to go out and practice leading? All right, get it done. Go do it.